All right, well, welcome everybody to another episode of L1A, Love One Another podcast. We got really lucky because we've got some returning guests here again today with the Oberski family, Dan and Kristin and Lee Wood. I think this is like your fifth podcast.
Yeah, I love being on the podcast and not having to be in your role. So it's really
thanks. Yeah, I appreciate that. But we've tried to get Lee off, but he just keeps coming back. Like it's a recurring problem.
Yeah, I'm like a parasite. I grow on you. So,
I'm just kidding. If any of y'all know Lee, you know that he has the best sense of humor and taking things well. So
Dan doesn't think that.
I do. That's why I make the jokes, because I feel so affirmed that you laugh at everything I say.
But another great honor of mine today, we have Mr. Dan Oberski on the podcast today on National Popcorn Day.
Nice.
And popcorn happens to be his favorite thing.
Yes. It is.
And so I'm just upset that we're actually on this video, like we're not celebrating with popcorn. So we'll have to remedy that soon after.
Yes. And you know what's interesting? We talk about development of disciples, okay? And so, like, if you know something but you don't do it developmentally, that's like you're like at D1, okay?
Yeah.
And then, like, if you're like you know it and you're trying but you're not really good at it, okay, at the task, everything's a question of competency or confidence, you're D2, okay?
Yeah.
And then if you're actually doing it, but like it's hard, okay, that's like D3. But then when you get to D4, like you are the master, man. You've mastered it, okay? I think we need to recognize that at popcorning, okay, if it's such a thing, okay? At popcorning, Dan Oberski is a master. He knows the difference, man, between coconut oil and corn oil, okay? The density of the actual corn used, like he is like D4. So if anybody on the podcast needs to know anything about popcorning, okay, we're gonna make sure that we include Dan's email in the show notes, okay? So
Perfect.
Anything, because he is basically the model for popcorn in a Western context.
I want to bear witness and testify. Last night at dinner, he was training us how to make the best popcorn.
Yes.
And I went from D1 to D2.
Yes.
That's right.
Perfect.
In a single evening.
You can disciple a nation of popcorners, bro.
Nations.
So,
The nations, yes, we can multiply it to the nations.
So with that, we're talking about community transformation, and that's the perfect segue. So welcome to another episode of L1A.
Welcome to the L1A podcast, a space to connect, communicate, and collaborate for the advancement of the kingdom in North America and beyond. Here we will discuss the disciple-making movement that is happening in this Western context and the return to God's design for discipleship, church, and life.
All right, Zach, so I'm super excited. I've actually been given permission to ask you a question that you've asked all of the other guests. So I think it's somewhat unfair because you've been able to prepare your answer. So I have a higher expectation of you than any of the previous answers. So probably this should be good. So if you could be friends, if you could be the friend of any basically contemporary of Jesus, okay, who would you want to be friends with, okay, and why?
Yeah. Well, I will say, yes, I have asked this question to everybody, but to be totally honest, I haven't given it one thought towards myself. But that's my fault. But as I just think of it even right now, I'd have to pick John. And for me, it's probably always been John because, one, that's my favorite gospel. I just love getting the intimacy, that firsthand account of like knowing Jesus. And I felt like no one knew Jesus like John. And he's the only one that didn't get martyred, not that that's the thing, but he got to have a revelation of his best friend that came back in this glorified state and got to see him. And so I would have loved to have been, even if it was just a day on Patmos with John and just hearing like, man, what was Jesus like?
Yeah.
That would just be amazing.
You know what blesses me, man, because we're close and stuff, but if you remember, that was my answer.
I don't remember that, no.
Yeah, so that was my choice.
That's pretty cool.
On the original podcast
That's pretty cool.
For similar reasons. So we have kindred spirits. Okay.
Man, well,
so
praise
back
the
to
Lord.
you being the host.
Yeah, so I am the grateful and sometimes reluctant host. Not really, but Zach Duke, just grateful to be with you guys, journeying with you, learning alongside all of you listeners, getting to talk to just some incredible people that are being faithful and obedient, failing forward as we all are, but just people I look up to and love so much. And so just thank you for taking the time to listen, to comment, to share. This podcast really only goes as far as you take it. So just grateful to be here and to continue to be here, and hope the Lord allows us to keep doing this for some time, as long as it would be helpful to others. So today we're talking about community transformation. So we'll start with Lee. Just give us a 30,000-foot view of like what in the world is community transformation, and is that where we should start?
So I think, like almost everything, community transformation, the manifestation of the kingdom of God on earth, is the byproduct of being the type of disciples that Jesus actually has called and chosen us to be, from micro to macro. And so I am fond of saying that it is both Matthew 28 and Matthew 25. It's not either or, it's both and it's simultaneous, not sequentially. But community transformation should be the manifestation of the kingdom of God on earth, in your neighborhood, in your city, as lights shining brightly in Babylon to the nations. And so that starts from micro to macro. And so I'm excited about being engaging in both Matthew 28 and 25 with Dan and Kristin in Fort Myers now. So they have actually been working on this from the most simple expression of the church, from their home with their family in their community for years, and being able to engage in that with one another. Wherever you're at, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step, but I don't really know anybody that's further along in that from a simple model, just as husband and wife, their family. And by the way, Zach, I think that the most simple expression of the church, whether we get any of the acronyms of DMM, CPM, or any of that stuff, are the redeemed image bearers, Adam and Eve, from their marriage, okay, intentionally wanting to see that in their family and every sphere of influence, including their business, okay, or businesses, okay, on earth as it is in heaven. And so Dan and Kristin are living into that from Fort Myers, okay, and Stacy and I get to do the same thing with them, the same way from our marriage and our home, the church that meets in our home with one another. So I was hungry, you fed me. I was naked, you clothed me. I was a prisoner, you visited me. I was homeless, you took me in. And actually being able to see that proclaimed, said, and demonstrated, seen. It can be heard and it can be seen. The kingdom of Jesus in Fort Myers unto the uttermost parts of the world.
So speaking of Fort Myers, I want to ask the Oberskis. I mean, community transformation means that something needs transformed, meaning it's not okay in its current state, like just speaking plainly, right? Mm-hmm. So as you guys have lived in Fort Myers, you know the people, you know the culture, you've seen how the kingdom is not there.
I didn't realize it when we moved into
What are some of the
Florida.
ways that you've seen in Fort Myers played out where the kingdom is not there and you see darkness and you see brokenness? What are some of those things that you see in Fort Myers?
Or where we were moving. And part of it was just how we live such pocketed lifestyles, like in America. And so I'm sure was happening in Michigan when I lived in Michigan. I'm sure it was happening in all parts of Southwest Florida. But you kind of move to these places of like comfort, right? And so if you're only around comfort, like it's hard to realize where brokenness exists unless you talk about it. It's kind of like on the news, like, oh, there's shootings over here, or old buildings over there, or parks that are neglected and not happening or being used, right? And most of the time, I think for the first 30 plus years of our world, it was, well, why would I go into brokenness? Right? Like that's not anything that seems applicable. Right. And we shared this on the other podcast. There had to be a shift in our head from kind of ownership to stewardship that needed to occur. And we didn't know that part until some brokenness had occurred in our life to expose it. And then we started to be aware that, brokenness exists in so many different places. And so we see it from the people, the places, and the different spaces. And then even the economy and the communities, right? So like within Fort Myers, there were huge divides. We have a railroad track, and low income live on one side of the railroad track, and higher income live on the other side of the railroad track. And then unfortunately, or just specifically in our market, that's Black Americans live right here, Hispanic Americans or Latinx live right here, and then white people live right here. Mm-hmm. And it's really segregated. There aren't, and by the way, the people of color all live in the low income areas. It's very, very segmented. And there's a lot of historic brokenness around that. But one of my mentors who lives in a lower income area had said there's no representation of success or good, the lack of brokenness. It's just brokenness compiling on brokenness over and over and over again. So there were hundreds of places and spaces and communities that we became aware of. And so that's when we decided and heard clearly, like, we got to be proximity. Like, if we're going to be loving our neighbors, then we can't have to come visit. Like, it's got to be where it has an impact, where they know that brokenness has a cost on us. Yeah. And so it's engaging, right? Yeah. So I probably just babbled a little bit too much around good. That, but
well, and kind of a follow up to Kristin too. What caused you as a family to see that and to go when there was that level of comfort? Like there was that shift, there was that change. Like, what caused you guys to look?
Yeah, I know. I do remember because we had lived in a just honestly, very white neighborhood before, and even a gated community. And it wasn't because we were afraid. It was just that's what the neighborhood had available, affordable housing. For us at the time, we had our best friends that all lived in the same neighborhood. Everybody thought the same, did the same things. And I remember when Dan first brought up the idea, and he is the driver on new ideas, generally speaking. Yes, I remember just saying, why would we do that? We're really comfortable and everything's great. And there were fears that came up in me about raising kids in a less safe situation. And all of that was eventually dispelled as we began to see and start to become comfortable with something new and kind of slowly stepping out. But as we came to this new part of the city, it has been just, I know your original question was really, why did we decide to do that?
No, keep going though.
I think it really was just a calling that we felt that we were supposed to step into something new, something less comfortable, something different than what we had experienced so far.
And reality was part of it, right? Like, I think there was a component of, like, we weren't living in reality.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
I'm not the host, but
Go
things that I've heard inside of there. So I want people to get it.
Yeah.
It's a model. Is one, as Kristin said, we heard. Mm-hmm. So it might have been like, so that's playing out inside of marriage, and there's intimacy with Jesus and the Father together. Mm-hmm. And then that they actually did some pretty bold things. Like, in other words, they had a bias toward action.
They heard and they
like
obeyed.
The inertia of like, we could just continue in the status quo, or we could actually do something about what we're hearing.
Well, and
that's pretty cool.
I would just add that Dan was really patient with me about that, because initially it was like, no, thank you. And, of course he's patiently, well, just pray about it. I'm like, oh no, here we go.
Yeah, that was exactly the same way I was with Stacy about this whole thing.
Okay.
Yeah, I was like, really, that's a joke, because you actually know my wife, Stacy. Like, I wasn't really patient. So you guys are a great model inside of there. So we're gonna have to do a podcast with Stacy on here.
We should
and actually show you.
Yes.
Here's the good model. Okay.
Yeah.
Here's how you do it all wrong at first.
Yeah,
Okay?
I mean, Lee would go off the rails without Stacy.
Absolutely. But conversely, like the same thing. This
Yeah.
doesn't work without Kristin. It is the image bearers from micro to macro, not with what they lack, but with what they have. And they recognize that that's God's, that it's all God's. And they're being bold enough to do something very old.
So let's talk about community transformation in like a more of a definition type of way, what it is, what it's not, what's good, what's bad. And because it can kind of feel like this intangible thing, like community transformation. It's this wonderful thing. And I know I've seen a lot of bad models of this, as we all have, right? And the first common solution when we see a problem in a community is let's throw money at it. And that's going to solve the problem. And what does money do? It only expedites what is. And so what is community transformation really, and what are some good ways to go about it and some not so good ways to go about it?
Yeah, one thing I'll say with what Dan said, and then throw it back to him, is like where there is in a Western context or anywhere else globally, not just locally, nationally, and globally included, people that tend to be affluent or have things, they have a management strategy about like, okay, let's go to this place, okay, oh, these are the problems, okay, and this is how we fix them. This is how we fix the broken. And I think like Laodicea, that actually people have to really see like where they started from is to the church at Laodicea. He says, I got something against you. You don't even know that you're blind, crippled, and poor. So that dynamic of what community transformation is not thinking that you're all that in a bag of chips and that you're going to fix people or situations. Right. The kingdom comes on earth through the manifestation of the redemption of Jesus in our own lives and being able to share that. And what I respect and about Dan and Kristin is they're actually doing that. Mm-hmm. So it blesses me. Yeah. So that's my stab at answer, and I'll throw it to you guys and be quiet.
Yeah, and I think what you said that is super true is even Christ, when he comes, he doesn't come with the items that were broken. What's shocking is he comes with my son, right? Like what we are, what the goodness that he did create us to be. Good. That's how he draws us in. It's not, here's all your sin issues, let me fix them even. And so I think he models that from an asset-based identification.
That's good.
Right?
That's
like,
good.
You're amazing. Yeah. And then, like, nobody wants brokenness. So as the health grows, it just pushes out brokenness.
Amen.
And so that's how I perceive transformation to be applicable and beneficial. Is communities, those even places of the worst brokenness have incredible assets.
Yep.
And so what I think good transformation is hey, let's pray into, let's talk about, let's pull out the assets that are there and then pour into those.
Amen.
Right? And find ways to resource those. And we use the term liberate people into what God has made them to be.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like if we can come around each other and we can just start having conversation, we can start doing life, and then that comes out, and then the world's transformed.
Yeah. So awesome.
And it's so great you said that, because I was literally thinking the same thing. I went through a community transformation training in Lee's living room with just Lee. It was just me. And And that asset-based community transformation was life-changing for me.
Yeah.
Like, we're not going into communities with anything. Yeah. We're going in there knowing that every asset to bring transformation is already there in that community with the people, with what they have. And so we're not going in with answers. We're not going in with solutions. We're going in with questions. Mm-hmm. Hey, what do you have? Mm-hmm. Where's the darkness here? If the kingdom would come, what would that look like from your vantage point? And you're helping them discover, because we don't know either. We're walking through this together. Let's discover together what you have, where the holes are, how you think you and your community can fix them. Mm-hmm. And let's, do you want to do this together? Mm-hmm. And so we're going in, and it's the same in other cultures. If we go in as these smart Americans to Southeast Asia, and we know what we're doing, and we don't listen, and we don't love, and we don't ask, hey, what's God doing? What's not happening here? That's just pride. We think that we're these little mini saviors, and really we're just brothers and we're just sisters.
So we talk about that in the tools, the patterns of principles are actually trying to live out what Jesus is speaking to us about in the Bible, where we find the person of peace. And we reach the indigenous people, and we do Matthew 28 and 25. That's in our own backyards, okay? So it's that's the piece that I love that we're talking about is we go. So it's Matthew 28, we go. Mm-hmm. How do we go? Praying. What are we looking for? Somebody will say, yeah, you're welcome. Stay here. What do? Stay.
Yeah.
And do the stuff. So you have to stay there long enough for it to merge. And so talking about it, it's really hard.
Slow.
Messy,
long.
And it's impossible without Jesus.
Yeah.
Apart from him, we can do nothing. But the cool part is, with him, we can do all things. Yeah. So keep doing what we're doing. Yeah. We'll get better at it. Don't quit. We win if we don't quit.
What?
But you can do that. Everybody can do that.
Yeah.
We can all do that as those called and chosen, equipped ones by Jesus. And so the resources, the people and the resources are in the harvest. And light can overcome darkness and push it back.
Yeah.
And that's what we're getting to do with one another. And that's why, honestly, there's a joy to it.
I want to hear in a moment, it's like a case study of Tampa and what the Lord's beginning to do in Fort Myers. But a question I have first, pose it to anybody, is why do you think we naturally have an inclination to do community transformation first before we make a disciple?
I'll take a stab at it. We talk a lot about the reality of most of us is we're sitting on earth, right? And so
that is the reality,
right? I mean,
most of the time I'm there.
I only say that partly as a joke. We also know that most of life is actually not just earthbound, right? There's all these influences, but that's good if you're aware of the amazing spirit realm and how God's moving, and how evil's moving, right?
Yeah.
But if I'm hungry, I'm not going to make it to thinking about something that's ethereal or post my life, right? And so I think transformation from our perspective, and this will create some conflict, and maybe I don't believe that partnering in business and in finances is binding myself to a non-believer, because it's not mine, right? My soul and my heart and my spirit are. So if I became unequally yoked in relationship, that's a real item. We invest in people that don't know Jesus, right? We're partnered in business. And some would claim that's an unequally yoked item. And I can tell you that it's messier and riskier, but the number of conversations that we get to speak into are greater because we don't have that as a filter. And I don't think he said, love those that love me. It was love your enemy and love, right? And so we start with that basis of, okay, you need a way, and yet you have a job opportunity or a project, or your home's falling down and we've got to build it up or stabilize it. Well, then it leads to further conversation. So then disciples come out of it, right? Like,
Exactly.
That's how I approach it, or try to at least.
Yeah.
So I think one thing that I can comment on toward that from both Tampa and Fort Myers is that a guy wrote a book, and I mentioned the title of it, but didn't give him credit. But Buck Jacobs wrote a book called Lights Shining Brightly in Babylon. And so that little book, okay, talks about, he totally didn't get DMM or CPM, but the dude got business, and from a kingdom perspective, that your streams of influence, okay, are your customers, okay, your employees, and your suppliers. So every follower of Jesus, everyone everywhere, okay, is a missionary or an imposter. So that's why I think on earth, okay, there's no clergy laity, okay? That's not in the kingdom, okay? So I actually think Dan and Kristin, okay, are both pioneering and shepherds. So she's like shepherding, okay?
Can we just pause for 1 second? Lee doesn't mince words, but he talks through them really fast. So like people don't pick up on what he just said, right? You're either a missionary or an imposter. Like you're a fraud. That's a big claim.
That's a big claim.
Like, there's nothing in between?
No.
I mean, another way to say it too, if people get caught up on the missionary, like going for missionary, is like you're either going and making disciples or you're an imposter.
Hey, you're a phony, man. This is what he created you to be. You're a missionary. And so that's clergy laity divides that and makes one seem better. That's hogwash, man.
Yeah. I think we need more of those hard conversations, be willing to get into the fact that, hey, on a regular basis, I need to get rid of my imposter.
Yeah.
Like my tendency is to avoid that discomfort and that engagement. And so there are elements where I've got to step into what I was commanded and called to do.
I'm not telling you, bro, but what I'm telling you, what that looks like just to encourage you, what you see with me is what you get.
Yeah.
You're totally repping Jesus. And like the way that looks, okay? So I'm just saying that piece. Like if it's him like convicting you about that, okay?
Sure.
But the reality is, like where I see Jesus, with you guys going like, way to go.
Yeah.
Like you're totally
and obeying.
repping like that deal in a way that's manifest across all those spheres of influence, okay? So I totally don't view you guys, or I don't think that he views you guys as imposters, bro.
Yeah.
Like legit. Like I like saying this just straight up. Like you guys are legit.
No, you've helped us on a lot of fronts. Is our investments.
again?
You've helped us on a lot of
Yeah,
fronts.
that's my love language. I don't hear it a lot.
Words of affirmation.
So, yeah, that's good.
I just have to talk nice
Shocking,
to you.
yeah.
Good you're telling him that.
Shocking, yeah.
I will remember
You
that.
can work on that.
Yeah.
Please.
So
so much
Curtis,
more fun to
he's
just
not
like
very good
dig
at
on.
So Curtis, like in coaching me and stuff, like
Yeah.
he's like an introvert, you know. He's not very effusive, you know. Like so, like I used to live for like when I'm like sharing with him, he'd go, "Good job!" exclamation point. Or he'd say like high praise, like next level would be way to go. 2 exclamation points, man. I was like, whoa.
So
encouraged.
this is some of the funny parts. Like, I said this to Lee. There's elements of what he's been doing in Tampa that he's probably had some challenges because he doesn't have the same person in me in Tampa.
Correct.
And the stuff that I've been doing in Fort Myers, there are elements of where Lee just is a hand and foot that I'm not.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so finding that community and that engagement of, I think the body was made to be the body.
Yes.
Right? Like all parts.
Yes.
And so like just working to identify and patiently, we talked about this yesterday too, right? Like it's like 10 years. Not yesterday. We were sitting in front of the gym and you're like, this is too slow. and it is, and it's not. Right, is the first time I met Lee was like 10 years ago, and it took us 10 years for him to be willing to come put up with us. But like we're more excited. Yeah, we're more excited about what God's doing because we get to do it alongside somebody.
Yeah.
And then I think you're liberating your community to step into it even more too, without you doing it.
So my question is, I thought about this. Should I have done it earlier? But what's interesting in the way that it's playing out is I had to sort of wait on Stacy. And so what's really cool for me now is to hear my wife like pray and then go, I'm excited.
Oh, that's
I'm like,
So cool.
That's amazing.
So, like, I got goosebumps right now.
Yeah.
Like, oh, this is it. But my challenge is, like, inside of all of that, like with everything, is anybody understanding, like, what we're saying and what we're doing? But we're better together.
Yeah.
Like, you guys being seen and heard, that's actually the we and fitting together.
That's right.
But my heart that we might be one
Yeah.
with Jesus and the Father on earth, that the world might know, that they might be able to hear and see it, that the kingdom comes on earth. That's what we're doing. Like, can we, like...
Well, just like you were saying to us, is like we
Yeah.
gotta...
And then he tells me, like, I can't remember, like, it's been a while. He says, Lee, do you know that, like, most people reach productivity at, like, this age? And I'm like, I don't want to hear that. Like, this is where most, like, stuff happens inside of the age of people, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I think he's trying to encourage me.
Well, here,
inside
let me
of
give
that.
you some encouragement of all the things
Right.
that are happening, right? Like God's timing in aligning so many things, right? Like your move into our community. Guess what had to happen too is like we had a gap and a void within our company, our brokerage company, that we needed a person to fill that your daughter filled.
Yeah.
And like they felt divinely inspired. Like they got goosebumps. They're like, well, wait a second. Like, are you serious? This timing is going to work? We're like, and so got to retell the story of transformation, right? So we had to have Stacy on board and we had to have your daughter on board. And then that meant that Doug and Darren and John got a new teammate that's going to be fantastic for them. And it's like all the people at my partner meeting the week before your daughter came, they're like, how do we know her? And then I get to tell the story again, right? And then so, like, I think the pieces that we can't see is like, yes, I want the whole world to know.
Yeah.
But if you move at your pace, you're going to laser cut through the world and miss the world. If you move at my pace, this overwhelming like wave and ripple will occur. Like I can't even see all the pieces that he's putting together, right? And so I think that's the exciting part. Like this one of my favorite quotes, right, is we overestimate what we can do in a year and underestimate what we can do in 5. And we're starting to see what God does in 5, right? So
That's so good for me, man. So that's like we did this one podcast like on shepherds, you know, and like how we do that together is the picture. Like all of that stuff is it being able to be heard and seen. That's what God's doing with us that we get to do with one another.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
it's so cool.
With disciples and with churches, and as that emerges into a city, how does community transformation emerge within that? Because one thing I'm hearing, which is amazing, is community transformation is also a going strategy. Like it's a way into a community. It's a way like from jobs to the other elements we've been talking about. But how do other elements, you can even speak about Tampa, from disciples and churches emerge to community transformation, even like with picking a spot, picking a community?
Yeah, so it's pretty like what we did in Tampa. Like I got trained in March of 2013 and heard that Jesus has favorites, the least, the last, the lost. So we went started prayer walking in the worst place that we knew of in Tampa, and we found Andre and Lynette. And then we haven't left. And it hasn't gone like over time as fast as I want it to go, but we've stayed, and then that's jumped to Clearwater, St. Pete, Citrus, to other counties around there where they get the same concept that they have to do the same things in Clearwater and St. Pete as we're doing in the University Mall area. In Fort Myers, like what I'm super excited about is I think that they're way further along than where we started, at with those things, and there's already like disciples and churches already there. In Tampa, like initial catalyst was me and Stacy and me making all the mistakes that you could possibly make, right? Over a period of time.
And quickly.
Like, and I agree. with Dan with regard to the gift mixes. But I think those gift mixes, that was preparation apostolically over that period of time for Fort Myers, because I had to slow down. I had to learn to work there. I had to be shaped, and the church has been shaped by that as well in Tampa. So I think that we're going to be much more, we're going to bear fruit together in Fort Myers and other cities. Actually, I believe that it will be faster because we don't have to repeat the same mistakes. We can continue to make new mistakes.
That's good.
So I was just going, this is probably derailing a little bit, except that I feel like maybe the Lord's telling me to share this, but just we're talking a lot about this macro idea of community transformation. Micro level could look like foster care.
That's great.
So I only bring that up because we've experienced it in our home.
Yeah.
And adoption and foster care, and talk about the community transformation at a very more challenging level because it's right in your home every day. But yeah, just wanted to mention that.
So I think you talking about that is good because that is from the most micro level with your family, because you're basically obeying at the most organic level. So you're doing both and.
Yeah,
You're not doing
fun,
either or.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's fun, again, watching God orient and move ahead of us, right? Like, so to pair back to that is we have a beautiful daughter now that we've got permanent guardianship, and we call her an Oberski. So I don't care what the state says. She's an Oberski. And when she first came into our world, we learned about things we just didn't know about, right? It changed our awareness in a whole people group, like the way that people live, lifestyle, requirements, like cosmetic requirements, hair requirements, just different things. And so that then forced us to engage with more others that knew that better, right? And so we met our hairstylist that took care of our daughter's hair because we're just incompetent. and in that we met her husband, who now works on my team. And then in that we met their daughter, who now is going to coach our daughter. And so it's micro in some senses, and then it's like, no way.
Yes.
It's like that is the stimulus that is probably making more impact on our ability to walk alongside our community than anything. And so, like, being aware of those and the way that Kristin kind of pulls us back, like she pulls us back into the things that matter, is she's always asking, like, I wonder if they're worried about that. And I'm like, who cares? Let's go. And I'm like, and then after I say it,
The feelings of people.
the feelings, anything of people. Like,
Anything.
I'm just like, run over them. Let's rock and roll. Let's build a new house right on top of theirs, right? And she's like,
Man, you and Stacy are really going to be so tight, Kristin, okay?
I'm
It's going to be
excited.
so healthy, okay?
Yes, it'll be so
Yeah.
good.
yeah.
That's
so,
awesome.
So I want to emphasize doing this together
Yeah.
is so key, right? Hearing you tell me about your prayer time with your wife this morning, of like, don't run alone.
Yeah.
That's right.
It's reckless. It's foolish. It's not where God has made us. Like, if you're married,
Yeah.
if you're not married, run faster. And then maybe listen to Jesus. I'm going to throw something crazy out. Don't waste your time getting married. Like, let the Lord be your spouse that runs alongside and get done what you can get done. And then he'll bring others to pace you, I'm sure. So, anywho, I just want to honor our wives.
Amen.
in
Amen to that.
Like, it doesn't happen alone.
Yeah.
And it happens bad when we're alone.
So I say all the time, people have heard me say before, people should thank the Lord for two people with regard to me in this order, Jesus and Stacy.
Yeah.
Because nothing works
Yeah.
without that most simple expression. And those spheres of influence that emanate from that, those are the ones we're actually influencing.
Yeah.
That we're doing it with one another.
Yeah.
And that's what we talked about. And it spreads. Like, your family, I try to tell you guys, like, apart from any DMM, CPM thing, that family's the church.
Yeah.
For me, Impact Fitness in Tampa was more like church before I knew anything about DMM or CPM, man.
Yeah.
And that's the same way with all your spheres of influence, that you're being salt and light in all those spheres. And we're getting to do that because it's the we. And it's the same thing in Indy, too, with you and Megan.
Yeah.
And, like, that is like the pebble in the pond that spreads out that way. Yeah, so it's very cool.
So Zach, you want to hear a tangible thing that we're doing? You could reference one too.
I think that would be awesome.
Cool. So we moved into Fort Myers, and those that have heard some of the other podcasts, like the only thing I know how to do a little bit good is real estate. And so I know that's
and popcorn.
And popcorn, yeah. I'm a D4 popcorn creator. And so like we move in, and Kristen's like, "You're not going to drive every day down to Estero, are you?" I'm like, "Well, yeah. Why not?" She's like, "Well, I think it'd be good if we had like an office or something closer." And so we started looking around and praying, and I had been tracking this one deal. And so the long and short is God did some miraculous things to allow us to acquire a property way below market value. I simply shared the story, and we bought it. And then one of my friends came in, and he's like, "Hey, can I just ask you not to do two things?" I'm like, "I'm the real estate guy. You go your way." I'm kidding. I listened intently with great desire to follow through. He said, "Don't basically make it yours." I wear skinny jeans sometimes, and he's like, "Don't skinny jean it." I'm like, "And don't put a church in here." I was like, "What?" And here's a guy that makes disciples. Like, the guy who said this is a disciple-making maniac. He's super fun. And so we were praying through it. Well, then what do we do with this 16,000 square foot building with no tenants in it? And even though we got a good deal, I still owe a mortgage, and I still got to pay the bills. Mm-hmm. So we started kicking around ideas and decided we're going to do, like, how do you identify assets in a community you don't have deep relationships? Create a space for them to be, right? And then do it in an arena that you've got any voice. So we created, like, safe, affordable working space, right? So little businesses started coming in, created opportunity for conversation. We put money into some deals. We invested in some partnerships. We did some real estate deals with others. And now we've got this, like, building space. And by the end of this year, we'll be at 100% occupancy over the last 4 years. And we've been able to touch like 57 different businesses, which then have other outreaching moving parts, right? And we've learned so much about the community of, like, where are the assets and what have they identified as things that they want to pour into of other assets that they've. And so that's been fun. It's also where February-ish, we're opening a gym. Lee's opening a gym. Again, he has knowledge and experience and a passion for fitness and activating the community in ways. And so maybe he can speak to what he's going to do with the gym.
So I hopefully, like, people can catch it. So we want to multiply disciples, leaders, churches, and businesses to see a kingdom ecosystem that can be heard and seen. And so, interestingly, the reason I can do that with Stacy as business owners of Catalyst, shameless plug, Catalyst Community Wellness on Broadway in Fort Myers. You're welcome. But I saw it modeled. And that's the piece that I think that maybe you guys don't get. Like, you're totally modeling that, right? And I already had that visually, but then you're, like, saying, like, yeah, like, come. So, yeah, that's completely our intention, is to be a part of the ongoing community transformation, or the visual that can be proclaimed and seen from that space on earth of what the kingdom of light, overcoming darkness, but not leaving, of actually being there, that you guys saw and went for, okay, that we get to be a part of. But the thing that's cool is, like, so now Stacy and I get to model that as business owners, okay, that are still, like, totally pursuing the same thing. So employees, okay, payroll, etc., but the same way that Dan and Kristin have already modeled, okay. But we have that piece of where we've been walking and multiplying disciples and leaders and churches for years, but we feel like it's necessary to actually model that as business owners as well, so that we can actually show, so it can be seen and heard on earth from Fort Myers unto the nations with one another. So I'm just super honored to co-labor with one another, and the title of the podcast is Love One Another. And so we're actually doing that. We're loving one another with a pure heart fervently, and collaborating in those things with our giftings, with what we have, the way that we're gifted, and with the resources that are God's on earth. And I think everybody can do that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I know we could keep going on this on so many different rabbit trails, because it's just so good and just really needed in all of the communities across America, globally. We talk about that stuff all the time. But just moving on to the quick three.
Can I say one more thing before we do that?
No, yeah, of course.
So one thing that I think, because a lot of people will listen to the podcast that are movement people, that are DMM and CPM, and you try to go there, and some people say that, that community transformation, that's social justice. I'm like, yeah, it is. We're supposed to do that. And so they think that all it is go, sow, share the gospel, see people come to Jesus, form groups that are identifying as churches, okay? And that's not enough. No. That's not enough. It includes like all of that stuff and the Matthew 25 piece, okay? So I don't think that it's movement without community transformation, because if you can't see it and you can't hear it, what is it?
It has to look like something.
Ethereal thing,
that's right.
Okay, that nobody can see or hear. And that's what if we actually do this stuff, okay, then our brothers and sisters that really go like, what are you talking about? Where is it? What is it?
It has to look like something.
This is what it is, okay? They can hear it and they can see it. So that's just me basically doing what Dan said, having a difficult conversation, that I'm doing that on this podcast because it needs to be said.
It needs to be said. And you're exactly right. Like, the church needs to look like something. It needs to be doing something. And if it's not being the church.
It's not a silo, man.
And how soon in Acts did they say, hey, we need to care for the orphans and the widows? Like, very soon.
By Acts chapter 6, and James wasn't even written yet, okay? Like, where did they hear that from? God.
Yeah. And they started talking about deacons and administrations and helping the people in the community, taking collections for real needs and doing real things.
You know, they had to have administration operation. Who's getting the food, who's getting the popcorn, and what time are they feeding the people the popcorn, you know? And like, who's going to administrate, like those things, even though that it's not in there, A, B, C, D, it obviously had to be done because there were a bunch of them. And there were thousands of believers, by the way.
The church isn't sterile, it's alive. And like when it touches communities, it changes them.
It's in the community.
It changes them.
By this shall all men know that you're my disciples, and that you have love one for another. So what does that look like?
Yeah. So
they can see it. They can hear it.
So one thing is we need to get people, like, if you're hearing this, like, man, I want to see what community transformation looks like. Come to Tampa, come to Fort Myers, come to Indy, come to these places and see what God's doing.
Dan's email, okay, with the popcorn, and we can put that in the show notes.
I think we've burnt this popcorn by now. We've burnt this popcorn. So quick three. I want to throw it out to Kristin as we kind of wrap up the podcast. But what encouragement would you give to others that are comfortable? And they're comfortable in their own little home. They like their life. Don't mess with it. Don't change their politics. Don't change their economy. Don't change this. Don't change that. How can you shake up the bag and say, Jesus wants us to be uncomfortable, but gives us the comforter? Like, let's step out. What does that look like? How can you encourage them?
Well, coming from a nurturer who likes people to be comfortable, this is a hard one for me.
Well, maybe you're the perfect person to answer it then. That's right.
This is perfect, actually.
It's going to be really nice and kind.
And along those lines, we've had people ask us about foster care and adoption, and I've always kind of come from a perspective of, listen, like, this, count the cost. You know, there is a cost. Be in alignment on it. You know, husband and wife not in alignment, you're not going to be able to really mobilize and activate in the realm of whether it means moving to a different place or whether it means foster care or something in the middle, you have to be in alignment, and it's timing sometimes, like we've talked about. But the benefits and the way that we've seen God move in our family, with our children, to see the way that they are seeing Jesus alive and active. We're not just, reading Bible verses to them and then expecting, okay, now do this, but they're seeing it. It's a very live life. Like they're seeing it right in front of them. And so their walks with Jesus are real. And they're all taking different steps to say, okay, what is God calling me to do right now in my life? So
good.
See, you were the perfect person to answer that. That was
She's the perfect
fantastic.
person.
The perfect person.
Yeah.
So Dan, I know you'll be the perfect person for this one. As people are getting started doing community transformation in their local community or praying about wanting to do it, what are just some simple things they can do to go and begin to discover some assets in that community?
Well, it just happens that our approach and how we got activated in Fort Myers is almost identical to Lee, right? And so we became aware of the concept that, Jesus has favorites. So who are his favorites? Where would they be?
Right.
If Jesus was walking this place, go walk alongside him. So do that in the simplest form that you can wrap your head around, and do it with somebody else that holds you accountable, because we didn't have the guts to do it alone. And we were like, hey, we know we're supposed to do this. I don't want to do it at all. And they were like, yeah, we don't either. Okay, let's do it together. And so we did a little cheesy thing like, okay, we're going to go to one street and we're going to buy some pies at Publix.
We had 9 kids in tow
Yeah,
with us.
yeah. Our families of 13 or 14 together, and this place that was unique to us. And we walked up on the front door and we said, "Hey, we're the Oberskis and the Opedals." And Jesus loved us really well. And then he said that we're supposed to love our neighbor. And so I know this is kind of awkward, but we have a gift, and wanted to know if there's anything we can pray for with you. And we just started getting to know our neighbor in the place that I know that Jesus would have been walking. And then we got Little Caesars, and we did popcorn and cotton candy and ices and played basketball. Super simple. And with total confession that it was totally terrifying. And it was so affirming, to the point where one of our daughters, for her birthday, said, I want to go do the thing that we did when we first got here.
Wow.
It meant
That's
so
amazing.
much. And that for the nurture, I'm really sorry. I know they're supposed to fast 3, so I'll talk fast. For the nurturer, the component of watch how God moves in all those you care about. They will come to life. They were dead, you were dead. Unless you're living this out, come alive and watch how God brings life into those you care about.
So cool.
So the strategy I heard was pies of peace, popcorns of peace, and pizza of peace.
I have to tell a story, though, about Dan, okay? So we've known each other for a while. So he's been to Tampa.
This is going to be your quick 3. Whatever you say, this is yours. This is yours.
So the unit. So I want to talk. So it's multiplication. So he's come and he's visited, and he's been in the apartments in the community. He's been in a home in the community. He's actually met some people in the community, okay? And he's seen the field, before it looked even at like it looks like today, okay? But you know what he shared with Tampa? What the Oberskis shared with Tampa? Not just relational, okay? Yeah. What he shared with Tampa is we've got an in-ground basketball goal on the field that the Oberskis shared, okay? That community is experiencing there. And
I didn't know that.
We've got,
that's awesome.
Well, I just thought about it when he was selling it. And we've got kids eat cotton candy on that field now because we got a cotton candy machine. And we got And we got a snow cone machine that they got ices, okay? They got the snow cones and stuff on the field.
Yeah.
That's actually multiplication.
That's city to city community.
That is and now I got goosebumps now, Holy Ghost goosebumps. Now it's sort of we're bouncing back and forth, city to city, with what we have, sharing, okay? That's right. That'll almost make me get emotional, man.
Yep.
Cry. So it's time to end the podcast.
Yeah. Just to kind of put a bow on it from what Kristin, Dan, and Lee, what you guys all 3 just said, is something, Lee, I'm reminded of something you told me, and it's so extraordinarily simple. We need to learn the gift of hanging out. show up and stay, hang out, and don't leave.
That's in the Bible, bro.
Yeah.
That's good.
So wherever you guys are, Jesus has favorites where you live, the least, the last, and the lost. Be with them. Go be with them. Hear their stories. Listen to their problems. Help them discover assets. Stay with them, and hear and obey with them. So Oberski's, Lee, man, unbelievable podcast. So rich, so good. Love you guys.
Love you too.
Thank you for listening to the L1A podcast. If you are interested in learning more about this topic or getting connected with the other disciple makers in your area, visit loveoneanother.life. Again, that's loveoneanother.life.